Steve, Beth, good to see you both. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Beth, we spoke a couple years ago about Sweet Tooth, so it's good to see you again.
Oh, great. Yeah, that was a couple years ago.
Yeah. Well, we can't keep track of time anymore.
I know.
What is time? What is time?
Steve, one of the coolest things about this show, in my opinion, and the format of this show is different cases every episode, meeting all these different kind of characters that have different backstories, different personalities. I'm just curious from a creative perspective, what was that like kind of seeing those characters like in the script and then kind of come to life on screen each episode? I'm curious about that.
I mean, we from the very beginning wanted to do the Hardy Boys on acid. And so that's a different case every week. And so what's amazing is having a different case every week means we can introduce a new facet of the world and introduce these characters that are taking us to places outside of the detective agency. So it was always really fun to see them come to life. I think my personal favorites from the season are the family in the haunted house in episode 3. And just from just purely from an actor delivery standpoint, the character that plays Dagfinn in episode 4, who just screams all of his lines, that was a delight.
No, absolutely. Beth, it's interesting because one of the coolest things about being creative in like the storytelling world is diving into all these different worlds. You've had a chance to work on a lot of these different worlds that have, you know, some similarities in terms of genres, but different kind of stories and characters of Sweet Tooth, Arrow, and everything. I'm curious how separate those journeys are compared to new journeys like Dead Boy Detectives. Do you bring mindsets to those new shows, or are they very separate kind of journeys from a storytelling perspective?
I will say that they're separate. Obviously, I bring my experience and knowledge from other shows, but this show specifically is so wildly different from any other show I've worked on, and it's so it's such a creative joy because when you're in the room you don't have restrictions, which is I've never worked on a show where you don't have restrictions, where you can sort of do whatever you want. Whereas, in Arrow, obviously it was way more grounded. And Sweet Tooth, even though it was, we had hybrid children, it was still more, I would say, more grounded because in this show, we're working with ghosts and the after, it's just a totally different world. And it's been so much fun for me. I've just had a blast.
Absolutely. Steve, specifically, just like you mentioned certain characters, one of my favorite characters, I think Briana did an amazing job in this show, and I just love that arc. I just want to know a little bit more about developing that character specifically, because that's like one of my favorite arcs of the show.
You're talking about Jenny the Butcher?
Yeah, Jenny, of course.
Jenny, I'm obsessed with Jenny. And Briana, I met Briana on Flight Attendant. She had a small role on Flight Attendant, and she was so funny and so deadpan and just it's so incredibly like on top of it that when this character was being conceived, I was like, oh, it would be amazing if we could get Briana to do this. And then we did, and it turned out great because, as you said, but like
don't mess with the butcher. That's all we're gonna
character. That character is the closest in life to how I actually move through the world, and so and what I expect from people. Yep. So I'm glad that you appreciate her.
Oh, 100%. Beth, I kind of strap in almost like a detective watching this show. It's very immersive and everything. That's the point, I think, of these shows, these whodunits, these kind of immersive experiences. But I'm just curious what the kind of preliminary talks were with kind of like delivering that aspect where the audience member watching Dead Boy Detectives is very kind of involved and active, because there's shows where there's passive audience members, active. You have to be an active audience member watching this show. I'm curious if you ever thought about that.
I actually have not in the way that you're saying it. Obviously, when we build stories, we hope that our audience is very active watching it and not passive. Especially with, how we watch TV now. But I think, the combination of the storytelling that Steve and I do, Steve is very propulsive and moves through story really fast, which is really fun. And so you kind of can't blink or you will miss something. And for me, like making sure like all the emotional connections are there and that you're really rooting for these characters. And I feel like that's also a way for our audience to lean in.
Yeah, no, it's really well said. All episodes of Dead Boy Detectives dropping on Netflix April 25th. Steve, Beth, so great chatting with you both. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, it's a total pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to Popternative. Make sure to check out our past episodes of Popternative on YouTube.
This has been an Autograph Communications production.